Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Canada InfoNet's webinar on how to stand out in the Canadian recruitment process. We have a very interesting speaker today who will be sharing lots of useful information with you. Before we get started, a few housekeeping information for you. This webinar is being recorded. Length is approximately 45 minutes to 1 hour. All participant lines will be muted. The questions, we'll try and keep it to the end of the webinar. There will be enough time. So please post your questions in the questions window. The recording of this webinar will be posted on the Canada InfoNet blog within 4 to 5 days. Your employment specialist would be sending a copy of the recording to you. Please do take the time to complete the post-webinar survey in the end. This will help us improve our services, improve our future webinar offerings. I'll really appreciate it if you can do that. My name is Sharbari Joyce, and I'm the manager of the Canada InfoNet Pre-Arrival Program. Canada InfoNet is an online pre-arrival program overseen by JVS Toronto. This 8-week National Employment Acceleration and Mentorship Program is for approved immigrating professionals arriving in Canada. We've served over 4,500 English and French-speaking immigrating professionals since 2016. Our dedicated employment specialists support professionals arriving in the next 12 months with a variety of employment services, such as employment preparation and job search tools, connection to an expert Canadian mentor in the field, resume and cover letter help, Canadian workplace culture and expectations for success at work, of course, webinar, employer-led webinars such as this one, online job matching platform and access to job postings through the Magnet job board, and our annual virtual fair, which is usually held in March. This year, we are offering new soft skills sessions in customer service and business writing for eligible program participants. Do reach out to your employment specialists if these are things that you're interested in. With that, I would like to welcome our guest speaker for today. Dmitri Stupak is a talent acquisition programs manager leading high visibility, high impact business initiatives at IBM around diversity and inclusion. He holds an honors Bachelor of Science in Psychology degree from University of Toronto and has been in the HR space for over 10 years. Dmitri immigrated twice in his life and is well aware of the challenges of settling down in a new country. He regularly partners with settlement organizations like JVS to offer new Canadians career advice and more specifically on how to apply successfully to IBM Canada jobs. Dmitri, thank you so much for doing this and welcome. I'll let you take over.
Thank you, Sharbari. Thanks, and it's great to be here, and thank you everybody for joining. I'm really excited to talk to you today because, as Sharbari said, I did immigrate twice myself. The first time when I was just 14 years old, I came to Canada with my parents from Ukraine, and I struggled with the language at first and the culture and so on. And when I went just right into high school, and the second time was when I was 31 years old, and I moved to another country to work for 1 year. So that was kind of me moving on my own, getting into a new place, new job, again, trying to, starting from scratch, like getting a driver's license, getting a house and so on. So I know what it can be like. And maybe, once we go through this today, maybe you folks will not be as intimidated by the process. And hopefully I can give you some useful tips and tricks on how to make this transition successful. So in terms of getting started, so you're looking to relocate to Canada and continue your career here. So definitely the first thing you really should do is do your research. So for example, do you know what are the top hiring locations in Canada? Depending on your industry and your career, do you know what are the hot spots for those types of jobs? So for example, if you work in the oil and gas sector, right, the main province for that would be Alberta. If you're in the tech sector or in the IT, the hotspots would be cities like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Ottawa, Halifax, both New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. They're smaller provinces, but they're growing their eminence in the cybersecurity field. So if you're a cybersecurity professional, maybe that's something you should look into. Other things to consider, for example, in Quebec province, a lot of jobs require you to be bilingual. So if you don't speak French and English, then your career prospects in that province might be somewhat compromised. You may not be able to get as many jobs as you would like. So from IBM perspective, for example, we are a big federal contractor. So as such, any job that we have in Quebec province requires a bilingual candidate. So we cannot hire anybody who does not speak French in Quebec. So it's something to keep in mind. Also, you want to consider the cost of living per province. So for example, Toronto and Vancouver tend to have very high rent, right, or the high cost of living. And New Brunswick and Nova Scotia typically are a lot more affordable to live, and salaries are not that much different either. So again, something to think about. Obviously, Toronto would have many more jobs, but then you have to kind of consider the cost of living, the kind of things that you're used to doing, the access to amenities and all those kind of things. And then again, you also want to research what kind of companies in your field exist in Canada, right? So whatever it is you're doing, you want to research the Canadian companies that do that kind of work. And then you can kind of start targeting your job search approach based on those companies. So you can research where they're located, how many offices they have, what types of individuals they hire, and that would be a part of the bigger picture approach to you trying to find a new job in Canada. And can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so the hidden job market. So I can tell you from IBM perspective, we post all of our jobs online. So anything that's available at IBM will be visible on our career site or on Indeed and other job aggregates. But that's not true for every company in Canada, unfortunately. Some companies keep their jobs hidden, they're not all posted. So it's important to find ways to find those kinds of jobs outside of just looking on Indeed or on careers websites. But for IBM specifically, it's very effective if you create a career alert on our website. So if you go on IBM Careers, you can join our talent network, and any job that comes out, you will get an email once a week with a list of all those jobs. So that you don't have to keep checking the career site. It will come to your inbox. And many other companies have a similar thing. So again, research the companies that are within your field of specialization and see if they have this option, right? And then that kind of automates your job search. You just sit back and wait for the jobs to come to you. Besides that, there's a growing trend of having virtual career fairs in Canada. So these are like a chat room kind of approach to job fairs where you don't have to go on location somewhere. So for example, just yesterday, I organized a virtual career fair, and IBM participated in it, where people from all across the world can join this career fair, and even before coming to Canada, they can chat with company representatives and find out about different jobs and apply. And there have been cases at IBM where people have applied from overseas and they got a job offer before they even landed in Canada. So that's something else that you want to look out for. But if you do that, definitely be upfront about your arrival dates, right? So let the employer know that you're not in Canada yet. You're looking to arrive by such and such date, so that the employer can also manage the expectation of when they need somebody to be in that seat, when they need somebody to start that job, so that you're not kind of waiting until the final offer process, where the employer maybe expects you to start the job in 2 weeks, and you're telling them that you won't be in the country for another 2 months, right? Because at that point, they may rescind the offer, they may take it away. So just try to avoid those kind of situations in the first place. Yes?
Sorry, just a quick question. So that's an excellent point in terms of being transparent when you're applying for jobs, because most of our program participants, they do want to start applying before they arrive, but they're not sure if they should highlight this fact or hide this fact, or even if they're highlighting, where do they highlight? Those kind of questions can be very confusing. You said it's great that IBM considers people even before they arrive. Of course, I'm assuming those are skill sets that you're maybe highly in demand. Do you consider just people pre-arrival in all occupations, or would those be just maybe specific to IT and software engineering?
Well, I mean, in general at IBM, we mostly hire for IT skills. We do hire finance professionals or operations or HR and so on, but those are maybe like 5% of our jobs, right? For the majority, it would be IT-related jobs or sales, like IT sales. But when you apply to jobs, a lot of the times, if a recruiter looks at the resume and sees that you're in another country still and you don't have the Canadian phone number, then they may skip you over right away. That's why it's very useful to seek out these virtual career fairs and talk to recruiters individually and say, hey, I'm about to move to Canada. I want to apply to this job or that job. What we've done at IBM, if it is a very hard to find skill, for example, the recruiters on my team, they would still reach out to people who are pre-arrivals. But for us, we do get a large volume of applications. So outside of virtual career fairs, we don't get a chance to speak to somebody live. It does become a bit of a challenge to get noticed, because if we have, for example, 20 or 30 applicants to a job who are in Toronto, and then one applicant who is still outside of Canada, then, logistically speaking, it is more difficult to consider somebody who's not in the country yet. But if you go to the virtual career fairs and you speak to somebody directly, and then you get to present yourself, then that simplifies the process. But again, for difficult to find skills or locations, for example, in New Brunswick, we have a lot of jobs, but there's not enough local talent, right? So depending on the location and how many qualified candidates are in that location, you may apply somewhere and you would still be considered, for example, for WebSphere. In New Brunswick, there's just not enough candidates that have that skill set, and we need to hire people. So we've considered folks from overseas, and we're willing to wait for them to arrive. Or mainframe development, same thing. We've got shortages in New Brunswick. So that's kind of a quick tip, I guess, to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because that's also something we try and focus on in the program. Our employment specialists, when they speak to the program participants, they do tell them about this fact that yes, in Toronto it might, and Vancouver, the number of jobs might look like, oh, there's many, but it's some of the smaller cities and smaller towns where there's actually there may be a lot more need than the supplies, right? So at a pre-arrival stage, I think it's great if professionals consider these factors and look at alternative options of, like, okay, maybe not just Toronto, like you said, New Brunswick might have better opportunities for me. The cost of living is much better there. So some of these things they definitely need to look at. But you said if you were comparing two candidates and one is in Toronto and one is still pre-arrival, so other than the fact that they're not in Toronto, would you be looking at sort of the local experience or like Canadian experience aspect?
Yeah, it's not so much about the Canadian experience aspect, and we'll get to that later on. Especially in the IT field, I find that if you're developing in Java, it doesn't matter where in the world you're developing, it's still the same programming language, the same algorithms, the same everything. Design of the applications is the same across countries. So for us, it's not that much of a big deal. It's more in terms of logistical situation where a candidate is not able to come in for a face-to-face interview, to meet with the team, to see the office, right? That's where the challenge comes in. And also, again, those logistics in terms of when can person start, are they actually going to relocate, or is something going to hold them back? There's always that uncertainty about candidates outside of Canada, as opposed to somebody who can just take a bus and come to our office and meet with us face to face and have that kind of a more personalized interaction. So that's where the challenge comes from.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so the other side of it, I guess, when you do arrive in Canada, it's very important to start networking right away. And when I say networking, you want to meet with others who are in Canada that do the job that you do. So for example, if you're a business analyst, you want to go to meetups that other business analysts go to. And I put a link to the website there, meetup.com. You can search for all kinds of meetups, like for engineers, for finance professionals, for business analysts, developers, and so on. And so you want to get to know those individuals and become friends with them, right? You want to be a part of their network because they know when new jobs are coming up. So if I'm a business analyst in a bank, I know like my manager might approach me and say, hey, by the way, we're going to need a new business analyst a month from now, right? And then so I'm aware that something is coming up. And if I have a network of other business analysts who may be looking for a job, I may approach them and say, hey, by the way, get your resume ready. We might have an opening. This is how I got my job at IBM. So I told you when I was 31, I used to work overseas. Then I came back to Canada and I started reaching out to my network. And I said, hey, by the way, I'm back. What's going on? What's happening in the jobs market? And literally a week later, one of the people I networked with came back to me and said, oh, hey, Dmitri, my manager said that we're going to need a recruiter. You send me your resume. And I sent the resume to her and she sent it directly to the manager. And here I am, I got the job, right? Did I apply online? No. It's, so having that kind of local network within different companies that, knowing people that do the similar work to yourself is very powerful in terms of getting those referrals. So when you meet people at these meetups, you want to give them something first. So you want to give some kind of value to them, maybe something that they're wondering about, like some new information within the industry. Just try to make yourself memorable so that next time again they think of you, you're top of mind when a new job or new opportunity comes up, and they say, oh yeah, by the way, I spoke to this individual and we had a very interesting discussion about the industry. I wonder if they're still looking for a job. I'm going to go and talk to them, right? And then you also want to practice your elevator pitch, which is it's a quick 30 to 60-second talk about yourself, where you very quickly tell somebody about who you are. So think about, for example, you're stuck in an elevator with somebody, right? You're going from one floor to another. You're in there only for literally about 30 seconds, and all of a sudden they ask you, hey, so what do you do? Right? And you have to quickly give them an answer. So you create that short sort of 30, 60-second pitch where you can tell somebody what your technical experience is, years of experience, type of role you're looking for. So I'll give you a quick example. So here we go. So I am a software developer, mainly working with Java-based technologies for about 10 years now, developing applications for financial companies. I've been a team lead and a Scrum Master in the past, so I'm going to look out for something similar, or a senior developer role. Right, so what did I say in that? I said I'm a software developer. The main technology I work with is Java. I have 10 years of experience, and I've developed financial applications. And I can also be a team leader or Scrum Master. So that's a very quick, sort of short blurb about yourself to let somebody know that, hey, oh, okay, so you may be good for this or that, right? So practice that, write it out, and you never know when you'll get a chance to say this. So just have that in your back pocket. It could be on the bus, it could be riding the subway, it could be, again, talking to somebody on the phone or in a meetup group. You never know. So just be ready to kind of take that out and have that quick spiel about yourself. And let's go to the next slide. Okay, so importance of the Canadian resume. So when you do come to Canada and you want to get a job here, all the recruiters are used to reading the Canadian version of the resume, so Canadian format. And you definitely want to get some advice on how to do that if you're not aware. So for example, your experience should be listed in the reverse chronological order. That means your most recent job should be listed at the top, and then the one before that, and the one before that. So your first job should actually be all the way on the bottom. That's how we structured in Canada. That's how recruiters are used to reading it, because when I read somebody's resume, I want to see right away what was their most recent position, what was the most relevant experience that they had, and is it relating to the job that I'm recruiting for. And then also things like your photo or any personal information like marital status, age, and so on should not be on the resume either. It's actually part of our legislation, but also it's irrelevant in terms of you getting the job. So there's no need for you to include that on the resume. So recruiters spend a very short time reading a resume typically because, especially at IBM, for example, we get dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of resumes for each role. So we don't have that much time to carefully read every resume, spend 10 minutes on each one. A lot of times it's like 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and we move on to the next resume. So make sure it is easy to read, first of all, and make sure that all the keywords are included, such as the specific technologies that you work with. So if you work with Java or C++ or SQL Server or WebSphere, make sure that's very visible on your resume. And also any type of project. So if you worked on financial projects or e-commerce or mobile applications, again, make sure you include it in your resume, as well as the responsibilities that you had. So when I read somebody's resume, I want to know exactly what you did in a specific company or a specific project, right? So I want to know, did you collect the requirements from the customer? Did you design the application? Did you write code? Did you do quality assurance testing? What were actually your day-to-day responsibilities in that job?
And I guess that's why it's also important to for anyone who's applying for that role to understand what you're asking for in that role, to go through the job description, understand what the organization does, so that they're able to portray themselves in the right manner. So for example, like specifically you said, if they worked on a financial project and forget to highlight that it was a financial project and they're highlighting something else, it's such a loss for both the parties, right? So it's important to sort of for the clients, for job seekers to understand what that role is about first.
Exactly, and sometimes it's useful to create a custom resume for a specific job. It may not necessarily, you may not need to do that every time, but again, definitely read the requirements on the job, and anything that's listed in the job requirements, if you've done it, make sure it's reflected in your resume. Okay, and anything that may be relevant, you may want to take it out so the resume is not too long. It should be 2 to 3 pages, I think, is as long as it should be in most cases. And then another thing too, your LinkedIn profile, right? Most recruiters live on LinkedIn, so definitely update it. Make sure it's easy to read. Everything is there. But at the same time, when you do these custom resumes for specific jobs, make sure that does not contradict your LinkedIn profile. I've had cases where I've read somebody's resume, and then I go on LinkedIn and check their LinkedIn, and it lists something completely different, including different companies, different dates, everything. So guess what? Recruiters will check your LinkedIn. In some cases, hiring managers will also check your LinkedIn to make sure you're not trying to trick anybody, because that right away will be a showstopper. If something like that comes up, believe me, you will not go to the next step in the process. So be upfront, be fair, don't try to make up new experience that you didn't have.
So Dmitri, a lot of our program participants are from, as you know, various parts of the world, and in some places they don't really have a LinkedIn profile. So you would say if they're applying in North America and applying in Canada, as important as a resume is also a LinkedIn profile, right? Like they need to have a presence on LinkedIn.
Definitely, and that's also because a lot of companies would actually be actively looking for candidates, and the #1 tool is LinkedIn. So as a recruiter, when I have a job where I don't have enough candidates for, I would go on LinkedIn and I would look, and I would search profiles, and I would reach out to people directly, and I say, hey, are you interested in this job or that job? And if you don't have a LinkedIn, well, chances are I'm not going to find you, right? So I would definitely recommend take a quick course on LinkedIn, how to make a profile, have a nice professional photograph on there of yourself, and fill it out as detailed as possible. So that's definitely a key for Canada.
And if someone is outside of Canada and they are arriving here, what would you suggest they do? Like, do they mention their location as Toronto or their home country? Because how do they show that they are arriving in Toronto, or let's say New Brunswick, or wherever they're coming in Canada, like their LinkedIn location, what should that, the
Right.
what?
Again, I would not mislead anybody. I would not put Canada if you're not in Canada yet. Um, what If you're applying to a job, you can mention that in your resume. So typically, at the top of the resume, you would say that you received your PR and will be arriving in Canada at this date. So that's something you can include on top of your resume, or in your LinkedIn profile as well. In the description of yourself, you can put in that you will be arriving in Canada shortly. But as a location, I would not put that as Canada, because again, it just creates that misleading kind of a feeling for recruiters.
But what if, because the issue is on LinkedIn, the jobs don't show up if you don't mention the location of your destination. So what would a recruiter's perception be if say someone puts their location as New Brunswick, and in the sort of summary section they clarify that they are arriving on a specific date, because otherwise, like, the jobs don't show up, right? The relevant jobs don't show up for them.
I'm pretty sure you can search jobs regardless of where you are, but I mean, yeah, you can do that as well. I don't see too much of an issue, as long as like I said, as long as somewhere in the profile it mentions that it mentions your arrival date and that you have a PR. So, for example, for IBM, we cannot even interview anybody who does not have a work permit or a permanent residency status, like a work authorization. So, if I'm seeing somebody who's not in Canada yet or who's about to arrive, what I want to see is that they have work authorization, and then I'm able to engage with them and interview them. So yeah, we can do that's okay as well, as long as again there's that disclaimer at the top of the profile that says the arrival date.
Great, thank you.
And then so in terms of applicant tracking systems, a couple of quick tips. So all companies are different, you'll find that, but if you need to upload your resume into the applicant tracking system, from my experience, it's best to use a Word document instead of a PDF resume, just because when you upload your resume, PDF format sometimes does not translate very well. And I've seen cases where PDFs would just have like a name and a short like job title, and everything else is missing. Like sometimes technology doesn't pick up things well from PDF. So to avoid that, it's best to use the Word version of your resume. And also, you can typically check the status of your application when you log into the ATS. So, in other words, if you go to the careers side of a company, when you apply to the jobs, you can later go back there, log in, and see what stage of the application you're in. So that's where. So for IBM Canada, that's definitely a thing. So you can check, for example, your resume could be in recruiter review status, or in sent to the hiring manager, or schedule interview, and so on, or no longer under consideration. So sometimes companies will not necessarily directly email you back and say you're no longer under consideration. But if you go into their careers portal, you'll be able to see that over that status. So at least you know what's going on. And some applicant checking systems do count keywords as well. So again, if you want to be a match for the job, it's important to make sure that the technologies that are listed on the job description are also reflected in your resume, right? So that if their artificial intelligence system is counting keywords, you want to make sure that your resume has those keywords, so you move to the next stage. But for IBM, all of our resumes are looked at by recruiters, by human beings, so to speak. So we kind of, that's not too much of an issue for us, but with other companies, it could be. So I see one question: where can I find virtual career fairs? There's a couple of places you could look. There's one which is very big and popular. It's called Intac Career Fair. It just happened yesterday, actually. This is something that we can kind of follow up on with JDS, and maybe they can provide you details. I'll look up some links. But one good starting point is if you go on Google and just type in Canada Virtual Career Fair. In many cases, you will find them. It's a relatively new thing. It's just been around for maybe a couple of years. but there's some companies. So JVS even had one as well recently in the summer. So there's more and more companies that are organizing these.
Yeah, so we will definitely share. We always share resources, such resources with our program participants, and we will continue to do that. So please get in touch with your employment specialist, and you will receive more information. Dmitri, I had a quick question on cover letters for you.
Yes.
When we usually job seekers apply on whether it's Indeed or company websites or sometimes through LinkedIn, it's usually a one button, say apply, and you already have your profiles and you already have your resumes saved. And because the job description doesn't, or application process does not specify a cover letter, most people don't attach a cover letter. Would you recommend that a cover letter with every job application is important?
I would say no. At IBM, we don't read cover letters. Again, it maybe depends on what company you apply to. If you apply to a smaller company, it may be attach a cover letter. But when we have 200 applications for one job, and one recruiter has to go through them within a day or two, they don't have time to read cover letters. Recruiters in Canada are trained to through the resume quickly, look for job experiences, look for skills, for technology and education. If you have a 2-3 paragraph cover letter, that's something I have to read. That will take too much of my time, and I will typically skip it. So just from IBM perspective, I would say cover letters are not required. But from other companies, if it's mentioned in the job description, that please attach a cover letter, definitely do that. And if it's again, a smaller company, what I've seen some people do is they would actually combine the resume and the cover letter. So the first page of their resume would be a cover letter, followed by the traditional resume on the second page and third page. So that's another good approach. You could potentially, instead of attaching 2 files, you combine your resume and the cover letter into one Word file. So that's I think that's a pretty effective approach.
Yeah, and because you mentioned that your recruiters read most of the resumes, I'm getting a lot of questions on would it help to highlight some keywords and highlight some, make it bold or highlight it in some way. Does that help?
I've seen that done before. I would say it's not really necessary. It does make the keywords stand out. So you could try doing that. But again, I will find those keywords anyway.
Yeah.
If you make them like if you make too many things stand out on the page, it's too many bold words on the page. It's almost like starting to hurt your eyes, right? So.
Exactly.
In my opinion, I would say it's better to have your resume in the same font, same like no bold anywhere, but easy to read font. The resume flow is nice and kind of goes one thing after another. And we will find those keywords anyway. You don't need to make them bold to make them stand out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go on to the next slide then.
Okay.
Okay, so interview process, and this is typical of IBM process, probably in a lot of cases with other companies as well. For us, the first step of the application process is usually to submit your resume online or via email. So all of our steps in the process are done through our online career portal. So even things like pushing the resume to the hiring manager, scheduling interviews, doing pre-offer checks, generating the offer, everything is done through that site, through that portal that we have. So you have to upload your resume and formally put your application in online first. So that's the first step. If you know a recruiter at IBM, then you can reach out to them afterwards. But your resume has to be in there, and you have to formally put your application to a specific job that you're applying to. From there, you would likely have a screening call with a recruiter where they would kind of go over some of your experience, tell you a little bit more about the position and what the requirements are. They would confirm your qualifications, and then next, depending on the role you're applying to and the company. So for IBM, I can tell you there are a series of tests that we do. We actually recently just rolled out a new type of test. It's a cognitive ability test, which takes about 30 minutes to complete it. It's not very long, and it's pretty engaging. It's been gamified, so it's like a little game that you have to play on a screen, and based on that, it kind of judges your cognitive abilities. If you're applying to a software development role, there may be a coding challenge that you have to do. So again, you do it in your spare time, you go on and complete the challenge and you submit it. And in certain parts of the world, we also do English language testing. So for example, in Japan, if you apply to an IBM job, then you may need to do an English language test. But typically for Canada, we don't do that because there's an expectation that you do speak English because, you know, that we're an English-speaking country and all jobs require English. So the one tip I can give you in terms of testing, usually there would be some sample questions or some information about the test itself, about what it entails, what it is. And so before you start the test, definitely do a little bit of research, try doing those sample questions, orient yourself about what is the test and what is required so that when you start the test, you're not scrambling to figure it out already, right? So you already have that information. You've done some trial questions. You know what to expect. For us, the testing will only be required to do once every 12 months. So for any job you apply to, you would do the test, the cognitive ability test, and then you don't have to do another one for 12 months. So if you apply to a second role, third, and so on, your first score will carry over to those other roles too. You won't need to redo it until 12 months, and then you will need to do the test again. So take it seriously. Don't just try to wing it. Make sure before you log in to do the test, you're in a quiet room. You're not going to be interrupted. You schedule at least 1 hour of quiet time where nobody's coming and talking to you or disturbing you, so that you can really focus on the test and do the best job that you can. And then, so once you do that stage, then the final couple of steps in the process would be with the actual hiring team, so hiring manager and potentially co-workers that you would be working with. We have a software that's called WebEx, which is a video communications a tool that we use for interviews for somebody who is not close to the office or who's outside of the country, where we can again do that kind of video chat interaction and meet with person virtually. So in terms of you know, how to do well in the interview, you definitely want to practice mock interviews, to, you know, maybe sit down with a family member or just in front of the mirror and find a list of common interview questions and practice your answers. Practice answering these questions so that when you're in the interview, you don't have to think about what to actually say. You have something prepared or you have something rehearsed. And there are two basic types of interview questions that you'll probably come across. There's behavioral questions that will ask you to describe what you did in a particular situation or on a particular project. So be sure to include things you've personally contributed to or the tasks that you've accomplished. Right? The interviewers want to know about your specific contributions, not what the larger team accomplished. Right? So that's still good to mention that we as a team, we rolled out this application, for example, but also definitely talk about what did you specifically do on that project. The results are important, but your contributions and task completions are what the interviewers is also looking for. And the second type is situational questions, where the interviewer will describe a situation to you and ask you how you would act. So for example, if the network is down, what will you do to bring it back up? What steps will you follow to accomplish that? Okay, and a good way to answer questions is to tell personal stories that relate to a question. So for example, if an interviewer wants to know about your ability to learn, right, then you would want to describe a situation where you had to learn something new, and how, you know, how exactly did you go about doing that? How long did it take you to pick up a new skill, right? So if they ask you if you had experience with a certain skill or technology and you don't have that particular skill, then don't simply say no, right? Don't just sit in the interview and say no, I don't have that, no, I don't know that. Tell them a story where you had to learn something new, a new technology, or where you used a similar technology, and then how that skill is transferable to the situation, to this current situation. But either way, you should keep your answers relatively concise and to the point. So don't go off topic. Don't start talking about unrelated things, because typically interviews are scheduled for a certain period of time, say half an hour or 45 minutes or 1 hour. And so you don't want to waste time talking about unrelated topics. And at the end of the interview, the interviewer realizes that he or she did not get enough information from you about what they needed to find out, right? So be kind of concise, be to the point, talk about exactly what the interviewer is asking you about. Make sure the interview, before the interview, you research the company, right? So make sure you know where they're located, what kind of work they're doing, maybe what are their main customers or main product. All of this is available on Google. So you don't want to go into the interview and ask them, so by the way, what does your company do, right? So that's the worst. So you definitely want to prepare. You want to make sure that this is the company that you want to work for. So how much can you find out about them before you go in and meet with that company, right? And again, at the end, be sure to prepare maybe 3 to 5 questions about the job or the project that you could ask the interviewer, right? So the interview is not just a one-way street. It's supposed to be a conversation. So to show your interest in the company or in the position, you should also ask them some questions. So say, what's the team composition, right? Or so how did you guys do in the last quarter? Or things pertaining to the company or the product to kind of expand your knowledge, but also to show the interviewers that you did your research and you really are interested in working there. And let's go to the next slide.
Before we move to the next slide, Dmitri, I have a question for you. You hired an IBM, and you in particular may be hiring a lot of technical roles. And from my experience, I know a very significant aspect that's different in Canada is the importance for soft skills, right? Like even when people are being hired for technical roles, there is a lot of importance being given to soft skills, like are they able to collaborate, are they able to think in a specific way, are they team workers and things like that. So how can you throw some light on that, and how can people talk about that in interviews or in the resumes?
Sure, and I mean that kind of comes with practicing different interview questions, and that's also comes from having those personal stories about your job, about how you performed on the projects, what were your tasks, how did you interact with the team. So when you tell a story, instead of just saying I know Java development, instead of saying just that, you can tell a story that I worked on the project. We had 3 team members on it. We developed a desktop application. I was the one writing code, but I also was pushing that code to my coworker who's a QA analyst, for example. And so that kind of story that creates an idea in an interviewer's head that yes, you can work with, that you can successfully collaborate with others, right? And again, practicing the questions, it helps you to enunciate your experience much better. But nobody in the interview, I mean, some companies may still be doing this, but nobody's really going to come out and ask you, like, so what are your soft skills, right? Or how well do you work in a team? I mean, obviously everybody's going to say, I work great, I'm amazing at working in a team, right? But that's not indicative of actually having that experience. Anybody can say that they're good, but how do you actually make somebody understand that you're good is by giving those examples of where you've worked in a team setting and you've achieved a certain result and what that result was.
Exactly, and like you very well said, it's not a direct question, but these are some of the things that are being evaluated in the interviewer's mind. They're looking for these aspects. So to weave in aspects of soft skills and some of the leadership elements that you've shown in the roles is very important, definitely.
Okay, so I think we have one last slide to go. And yeah, so again, so going back to low Canadian experience, right? In certain roles, this is not really a problem. So I would encourage you guys not to be intimidated by that. In some industries, for example, if you're a construction engineer, you may need to learn Canadian building standards, right? Because we have a different climate, we have a different soil, and so on. So you may need to take some certification courses or boot camps, bridging programs to kind of help you get up to date on the Canadian side of things. And so, for example, if you're in human resources, well, Canada has different legislation as opposed to some other country, right? So you would need to know what are those differences. But typically, that would be like a few months course, and you can be up to speed. So again, in technology, no Canadian experience is not a problem. I've hired people without Canadian experience into software development roles. It's like I said, Java language is here the same as it is in Europe, same as it is in India, and so on. So don't let that kind of intimidate you and stop from applying to jobs or thinking that you didn't do well because you don't have Canadian experience. Now, where that does come into play sometimes is in certain sales positions where a candidate is required to have local contacts, or they can bring a local book of business to a company like to IBM. So in those kind of situations, you may find that you do need some Canadian context for the job. So you need to know which companies can use the product that you're about to be selling, or you already have to have some contacts that you can kind of reach out to quickly and get some sales. Another one that's also applicable to us is federal security clearance. So IBM does a lot of work with the federal, provincial, municipal governments, and a lot of those projects are classified, meaning you have to have certain level of access to be able to work on those projects, and that means you have to apply to the government and get a security clearance. And if you have not been in Canada for at least 5 years, that means the government has to send inquiries back into your country and get background checks, police checks, and so on from your country, which in some cases could take up to 6 months. So that's another thing that's kind of a little bit difficult for us to hire somebody and then have to wait for 6 months before they can start working. So that would typically be listed in the job description itself. So you can find those kind of roles where it says you need level 2 federal security clearance. Well, if you haven't been in Canada for very long, then likely you may not be considered for that role. So that's just kind of a couple of things to keep in mind. And then another one is to practice English, right? You're going to be working in an English language, so when you come here, don't just keep speaking in your hometown everywhere you get a chance to. Like, try to actively practice English. So speak English with your family at home. Watch English TV, read English books, right? The more you can practice, the better you can kind of get used to English as fast as possible and do much better in the interviews. And then other things like be ready for the weather, right? Depending on where you're coming from, we have really cold weather, so make sure you're prepared for that. Maybe try some winter sports so that you're not locked in at home for a good 6 months a year, because we have really long winters. And from my experience, when moving to a new place, you kind of want to get acclimated with that culture as quickly as possible. So join different clubs, like a book reading club or chess club or something, whatever is your interest. Just go and join the community, right? Get involved, get to know different people. And again, who knows? Maybe you'll get a chance to practice that elevator pitch when you're at one of these local gatherings, right? So don't just stay at home and stress out about looking for a job. Get out there, meet people, and I'm sure everything will go well for you.
That's great, Dmitri. That was a lot of good information there. Thank you so much. We have some lots of questions coming in. One of the questions is on certifications. Do you, from IBM and recruiters, do they look for certifications for some skills, and even though people have experience in that field, do Canadian certifications matter?
I would say no. I mean, it definitely matters, right? It helps the application, but one of the first thing that we consider is the experience. So have you done the work that we want you to do? That's the number one thing. Certificates are kind of secondary. I would say, so for example, I was at a career fair yesterday, and I've spoken to some folks who are transitioning into a totally different career where they don't have experience. I would say in those kind of situations, certificates become much more important because the recruiters can see that even though you haven't done that kind of work, but you have these and those certificates that apply to that field. So that's where certificates become much more important. But in any case, when you do have those certifications, it does show to the recruiter that you care about that field, that you take your time to go and achieve those certificates and keep them current. And so, again, from IBM perspective, it's more important what kind of experience you have. That's number one. But certificates, I would not discount them either. They do have their own importance.
Great, that's good to know. Another question that seems to be repeated a couple of times is sometimes people have multiple profiles, because in other countries, having multiple skill sets and focusing on multiple areas is considered an asset. But that's another thing that's different in Canada. Specialization, the more you specialize, it's better here. So sometimes we've noticed that our program participants have to sort of hide some of their other experience and try and focus more on the job that they're applying to, which would mean they have multiple resumes. So when they're applying on IBM portal, and if they have multiple resumes and they apply for different roles, is that something, what's your advice on that? Is that considered okay if they're targeting their resume for a specific role? Let's say someone has been a financial analyst and a business analyst, and they apply for both the roles. What would you advise, and how do they approach this?
So I would say that there's a way to have a resume that kind of encompasses both of those fields. I mean, it's hard to say without more concrete examples. Financial analysts and business analysts are relatively similar. You could even say you're a financial business analyst, right? If fields are very similar, you could keep a lot of information the same. But again, like I said, when you apply to jobs, it's good to tailor your resume towards the position that you apply to, right? So take out irrelevant info and make sure the relevant information is there, and that's fine. But again, do try to keep it consistent with your LinkedIn profile as well. At least the companies you work for and the dates of your employment should definitely match up, right? If you tweak your title here and there a little bit, that's fine. And if you change your responsibilities a bit, that's okay. But it has to have at least some, it has to maintain some kind of consistency across that. But yes, so when you apply to different jobs, you can definitely modify your resume to make sure it fits for the job that you're applying to.
Great, that's good to know. Sorry, there were multiple questions that I suddenly came up, so I'm like, if our program participants sometimes they do short landings and they go back, so they have Canadian phone numbers, and they have they have a friend or a family member in the city of destination, so they do have Canadian addresses. Would you say even if they have all of this, they should still specify in their resume that they're not in the country yet?
I've had those cases, and I every time I find out right away what's going on. So, I mean, from my perspective, I would know anyway. There's no way you cannot trick a senior recruiter; they will find out, right? We're kind of trained on finding those kind of things out. So,
when you find out, is that a bad thing for the candidate? Is that considered a negative? That they were trying to hide that they are still outside the country?
Maybe in some cases, yes, it would, because if you're trying to hide something, then I would question why. Like, why are you not being upfront? And you can avoid that just by putting a short note in your resume that I can relocate back to Canada on short notice. That may, if you're applying to a job and some junior recruiters looking at your resume, that may fly under the radar. But for experienced recruiters, and I can tell you from perspective of IBM, everybody on our team will catch that right away. It would have, it may not, it will not take you out of the process, but it would just, that initial kind of first impression will have some negative connotations with, which I would prefer, if you avoid it.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. How does the internal sort of, I'm sure IBM has a referral system where your employees are able to refer, someone from their network to job opportunities. Would you recommend that, if our program participants are able to find, other IBMers, or if they're targeting another employer, an employee from that organization, and approach them for networking and then have them apply? Is that like a better sort of option?
Definitely. So that's when we talked about networking. That's the number one best way to get a job, is to have somebody from the company refer you. And not only that, we have a tool at IBM which we use for employee referrals. It's an employee referral bonus program. So somebody that refers you to a job might actually get a bonus for it as well. And also the way your application is tagged in the system is tagged as an employee referral, which typically we would be looking at first. So like, we kind of prioritize those applications. So whichever way you look at it, if you find somebody from that company to refer you to a job, that's always better than just applying online on your own.
That's great. Thank you. Would you, let's say it's someone in IT, how long before they arrive would you say is a good time to start applying for roles? We typically, if there are people who are applying, job seekers are applying from outside Canada, how long before they arrive in Canada would you say maybe a good time frame to start applying? We usually typically say, 4 weeks or so before they arrive, it's okay to start applying for jobs, because it is a learning curve. It takes a little bit of time to understand how the processes work. So why not start applying? But would you recommend that that's okay, or they have to arrive here?
Yeah, or maybe even more, because with certain companies, like interview process itself could take 4 weeks from the point when you apply to the point when all the interviews are done and offers extended. It could be 3-4 weeks, maybe even more, 5 weeks, depending on the role. So I would say when you're even a few months out, I would start applying, like 2 months, 3 months even. I would start looking at the job market and start applying and networking in Canada.
That's great. And I think that's most of the questions that came in. If you have any other questions, please do send them to our employment specialists, and we will be able to support you through all of the queries that you have about job search in Canada. Thank you so much, Dmitri. That was really, really useful for the entire team, even the program participants. So we really appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you so much.
And thanks for inviting me. It's great being here. I hope some of the advice will translate to some new Canadian jobs for you folks.
I'm sure it will. Thank you so much.